Alright, so in this video we're going to be talking about cartridges again. So this is going to be NAS3 versus brass case velocity comparisons. We've got 308, 556, 300 blackout, and 86 blackout. So we're going to be comparing like the brass counterparts to the NAS3 counterparts and see what kind of speeds you can actually expect. So first we'll talk about the NAS3 technology and how it works. And I've got some note cards to kind of keep me on track so I'm not rambling too much. So the NAS3, it's a nickel alloy steel, so it's lighter than brass while being stronger than brass. And it's also thinner than brass while still being stronger than brass. So you can have thinner case walls, which leads to more case capacity. When you have more case capacity, you can fit more powder in there without like jumping the pressures. So that's why you can get higher speeds out of NAS3 cased ammo versus brass with the same pressure. It's because of that extra powder capacity. So higher velocities, lower pressures, consistent wall thickness, and consistent neck tension. And the consistent wall thickness and neck tension is part of the reason why you'll see subsonic ammo loaded in these cases, because you're not really caring about extra velocity when it comes to subsonic, but when you have a more consistent case, you're going to have more consistent SDs, more consistent speeds, just better ammo. Like this case just provides a better opportunity for your ammo to shoot good. So I'm editing and realized I forgot to bring up one of the big pros of the NAS3 case in my opinion, and that's being able to utilize heavy for caliber projectiles. And what I mean by that is, I think the best example would be the 85 grain 556. That's kind of on the edge, if not over the edge, of being too heavy for the cartridge, at least in a traditional brass case. You really can't get the speeds to take advantage of that higher ballistic coefficient in a traditional brass case. But with the NAS3 and its higher velocities because of that extra case capacity, you can take advantage of those heavier weights. Same with like 185 grain 308. I see a lot of those that are loaded with the bullet seated way out, and it's a single feed only thing so they can gain that extra case capacity and take advantage of that bullet. But in the NAS3 case, you don't have to mess around with that too much, so you can take advantage of those heavier bullets. And when it comes to subsonics, one example of the case capacity being essential is this is a 405 grain bullet, and it's seated way down there, and with 8.6 you're shooting at a really short barrels. So to get that 1,000-ish feet per second out of a 405 grain bullet out of 6 to 8 inch barrels, that extra case capacity is pretty essential because, like I said, that bullet's way down there. So yeah, so that's another big pro in my opinion. And when it comes to the weight savings is actually pretty significant. A lot of it's going to depend partially on like the projectile you have in there, but like picking up this 308 case and picking up that 308 case, there's a big difference. When you load a magazine, you notice a big difference, and I'll put the weights up here like of loaded magazines with brass versus the NAS3, same bullet, same everything. The weight savings could be exploited more by like government organizations of truckloads of ammo, and there's a 50% decrease in the case weight. That's going to be a big difference for them when you think about combat loadouts of 8 magazines. Like the weight difference makes a difference when there's a lot of ammo involved. Okay, so moving into the velocity test, I'll talk about the bullets we're using. So the NAS3 stuff is all loaded by Phantom Defense. So for 308, it's a 175 grain Sierra Match King in the NAS3 case versus Federal Gold Medal Match, same bullet in a brass case. 556, 77 grain OTM, the bullet is a Hornady bullet. IMI 77 grain OTM, same bullet, just different case. 300 blackout, 110 TAC TX in the NAS3, and then we've got Black Hills loaded with the same bullet in a brass case. 8.6 blackout, I don't have any of the brass case 185 grain TTSX, so I had to contact Phantom Defense and ask him what he was getting out of his 12-inch barrels and compare it to what I was getting with these out of my 12-inch barrel. So that is going to be the only ammo that's not tested on the same day, same everything, so take that one with a little bit of a grain of salt. Alright, so this is going to be the IMI 77 grain out of the 16-inch Criterion. 2646. 2569. 2675. 2648. And 2683. I don't know what was going on with those, but the SD was 40. So 2569 was the minimum, 2644 was the average. Yeah, that SD is terrible. All right, so now we've got the Phantom Defense 77 grain OTM with the NAS3 case. So 2846. 2850, 2871, 2821,
and 2870. I don't know if it's the cold, but the SDs aren't as good as I was expecting in either one of those, but got an average of 2850, which is what I expect, and then SD of 18, so quite a bit faster. All right, so now we've got the IMI 77 grain with the 11.5. 2348, 2412, 2307, 2348, 2431. An SD of 45, and the average is 2369. All right, so now we've got the Phantom Defense 77 grain OTM with the NAS3. 2596, 2589, 2611, 2634, 2627. So the average is 2612. SD of 17.3, and yeah, that speed you could take to 1,000 yards pretty easy. I think with a lot of the normal match grade stuff out of the 16-inch, I'm getting about 2600, 2650. So that's not bad at all for an 11.5. All right, so now we've got the Black Hills 110 grain with the Barnes TAC TX. Yeah, so this is some surplus stuff that I got. So 2003, 2003, 1978, 2035, and 1977. So an average of 1999, an SD of 21. All right, so now we've got the Phantom Defense loaded with the same bullet, the 110 grain TAC TX. And I shot this not that long ago on a much warmer day, so we'll see if the SD changes at all. But 2142, 2155, 2139, 2142, 2155. So average 2147 with an SD of 7. So that's about what I'd expect. So all right, so for the 308 test, we're gonna shoot 175 grain federal gold medal match, and then shoot the Phantom Defense loading with the same bullet. It's 175 grain Sierra Match King. This barrel's a touch slower than a lot of the other 20-inch barrels have been around, but we'll just see how it does. 2539, that's a lot faster actually than I was expecting. 2483, that's about it, right? 2465. 2494. And 2479. That first round was a little bit weird. Normally I average like 2430-ish, I think. This one I averaged 2492, SD 25, which is a lot higher than I'm used to seeing with federal gold medal match, but it is what it is. All right, so now I got the Phantom Defense 175 grain Sierra Match King in the NAS3 case. $26.50. 2622, 2626, 2640, 2625. SD of 10, average of 2632.
So now we'll talk about the velocity gains, and I'll put this chart on the screen. So for 5.56, the brass case with the 16-inch barrel is getting 26.44, and then 28.50 with the NAS3. So that's a 7.8% increase in speed. With the 11.5, this was kind of interesting. So 23.69 with the 11.5 with the brass cased IMI, and then 26.12 with the Phantom NAS3. So that's a 10.2% increase. That's a pretty huge increase because the NAS3 velocity from the 11.5 was almost the same as the brass case from the 16-inch. So 308. The 308 in both these cases aren't loaded for max speed. They're loaded for accuracy. So this one's kind of a little bit different. I bet these pressures are really similar because it's, you know, that has to do a little bit with accuracy. But you got 24.92 with the brass case stuff and 26.32 with the NAS3, which is a 5.6% increase. 300 blackout, we were getting 19.99 average with the Black Hills brass case stuff, and then 21.47 with the Phantom NAS3, and that's a 7.4% increase. 8.6 blackout, he's getting 21.50 with his brass case stuff, which I don't know if he's going to produce anymore. I think everything's going to be in these cases. And then I was getting 23.20 out of my 12-inch barrel, so that's almost an 8% increase. So it's pretty simple to see, like, a faster moving bullet when it's the same bullet, same platform and everything. It's going to be better in just about every way. When it comes to wind, it's going to be less affected, and it's going to drop a little bit less, or, you know, because it's faster, so your elevation correction is going to be a little bit less. Up close terminal performance when you're shooting animals or people, like, it's going to be better because it's moving faster. The bullet's going to expand at further distances. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. I had to pick like a metric to sort of demonstrate the difference, and I chose the transonic zone. The transonic zone is when the bullet is slowing down to the point where it's making the transition from supersonic to subsonic. Some bullets don't make that transition well at all. Like, I doubt these, like, hunting bullets aren't designed to make that transition well, so they might just like completely fall apart at that zone. But the 175 Sierra Match King makes it pretty seamlessly. 5.56, I haven't noticed a huge difference out at those distances. So we'll talk about the brass case loadings to the NAS3 case loading. So for 8.6 blackout, Transonic 650, and then we moved it to 800 yards with the NAS3. That's a 23% increase, which was pretty huge. And I had checked the math a couple times, and that's the number I kept getting because that seemed really like a big jump. 175 grain brass was 1,100 yards to Transonic, and then 1,200 yards with the NAS3, so 9.1% increase. 5.56 went from 900 to 1,000, so 11.1% increase. 300 blackout, that's kind of a funny way to look at it because you're not really going to be shooting these that far, but 450 to 500, so an 11% increase. So 11, 11, 9, 23, so you probably average at it like 12, 13%, but typically you're seeing about 10% increase in the distances before you hit the transonic zone. So obviously this is higher performing ammo. Typically I'm getting way better accuracy with the NAS3 stuff, at least from Phantom Defense. So more consistent, faster, lighter. Like, it's got everything going for it except for two major things in my opinion, and that's going to be price and availability. So I made this other card here, I'll show you. So we'll talk about more specific prices, but brass is going to be cheaper, it's going to be more available. I did a little X because it's not as lightweight, and accuracy I put a check because it's still really good, and depending on who's loading you might not notice a difference, but cost and availability, those are the big ones. So NAS3, the pros are speed, strength, accuracy, consistency, weight. Big knock for availability because Shell Shock can't produce these cases fast enough. Like, a lot of times you'll find these out of stock from Phantom Defense, so it's like you're going to end up having to buy brass case stuff, and so availability is huge. Cost is it's going to be more expensive. It's not as expensive as I thought it was going to be, honestly, but we'll talk about that. And then it looks sick. So for prices, 300 blackout, you're going to be paying $2 a round from Phantom Defense for this loading. The Black Hills was also $2 a round. I looked around, and the best pricing I can find really is Bone Frog Ammo loads this bullet. It's like $1.70 per round. So if that, I'm not sure how fast theirs is moving, but it's probably going to be similar to Black Hills. So, is that extra 40 cents a round worth the speed? 308, this one's also a little bit hard because, so this is $50 a box of 20. Federal gold medal match you can find in stores for like $40, $45 a box, but sometimes, like these ones, they say factory seconds because the brass was blemished. I got those for $20 a box, and that's like a value that you can't touch with these cases just because that's just crazy cheap. So depending on the economy and everything, this could be similar in price, but it could be way different because it's just not that static. 8.6 blackout. 8.6 is super expensive. So these are like $370 around, I think. And the brass case stuff, I don't think was too far off, and I don't think you're gonna see a lot of stuff from Phantom Defense in the brass cases anymore anyway, because the performance gains in 8.6 are like, you need as much speed as you can get with the 8.6, so I'm not gonna buy any supers that aren't in this case anyway. But I think best case scenario with a good expanding bullet, you're gonna be like probably $3 around. So in my opinion, I think it just makes sense to just always go this if it's available. 5.56 is another one that's kind of hard to make a direct comparison to, because there's so much brass 5.56 out there, and I've shot tons of the 77 grain OTM from different manufacturers, and the one I'm going to compare it to is Bone Frog ammo, because they have been the most consistent of any ammo I've ever used. And I mean, when I mean consistent, I mean in stock, and no matter when you buy it, it's going to be going the same speed, same SDs, same accuracy. So you can buy it, because this is how I buy ammo. It's just like a little bit here, and then months later I'll buy more, and it seems like every manufacturer can't figure out how to just get their ammo consistent, because like this IMI, if you look at my video from last year, it was kind of slow, but it shot really good, and the SDs were good. This ammo that I bought 400 rounds of it, and it shoots terrible. The SDs are terrible. I don't know, the consistency isn't there. So that's why I'm picking Bone Frog, is because they're the most consistent. They're really, really reliable when it comes to being in stock and just being a really, really good performing round. So $1.35 per round for the Phantom Defense stuff, and you're looking at about 90-ish cents a round for Bone Frog. So you have to decide for yourself if that performance gain is worth it to you. So for me, in my opinion, if I'm doing something a little like more important, like something like competition or hunting, I'm gonna try to get the NAS3 stuff if it's in stock, just because to have that edge in those scenarios is worth it to me. 300 blackout, I'll probably always buy these supers with this case, because the price difference isn't that crazy, and the speed difference is, you know, pretty significant in my opinion. Same with the 8.6. I'm not going to buy Supersonic 8.6 without these cases. So yeah, just you'll have to look at your own situation and see if the value is worth it. Let me know in the comments, like, if you think when you would pick the NAS3 over brass, if you think it's worth it at all, what these performance gains mean to you or mean to, you know, whoever. So thank you for watching.